Everyone talks about Eleven's powers, Mike and Will's bond, Max and Lucas's romance. But there's one relationship that completely changed Stranger Things. And it wasn't supposed to exist. Steve Harrington and Dustin Henderson, the popular jock and the nerdy kid. They had no reason to become friends, but somehow they became the heart of the entire show. And here's the psychology behind why this friendship works so perfectly. Let's break it down. Season 1. Steve was a bully. He hung out with Tommy and Carol. He smashed Jonathan's camera. He spray-painted slurs on the movie theater. He was the classic high school antagonist. And Dustin? He was just another kid in the party. They didn't even share a scene together in Season 1. But then Season 2 happened, and everything changed. Steve showed up at the junkyard with his nail bat. He protected Dustin, Lucas, and Max from the demodogs. And for the first time we saw it, Steve the babysitter. But this wasn't just a plot convenience. Psychologically, this was attachment theory in action. Attachment theory says that humans form bonds based on mutual need. And Steve and Dustin? They gave each other exactly what they were missing. Let's start with Dustin. Dustin grew up without a father. His mom is loving but overprotective. And the party? They're his best friends, but they're all the same age. They can't give him what he really needs, a role model. Someone older who sees his potential. Someone who treats him like an equal, not a kid. And then Steve walks into his life. Steve who compliments his ideas at the junkyard. Steve who drives him to the snowball and gives him hair advice. Steve who says, "You're gonna get all the girls with that Farrah Fawcett spray." For Dustin, this wasn't just friendship. This was validation. From someone cool, someone he admired, someone who made him feel seen. Now let's flip it. What did Steve need? Steve's entire identity in Season 1 was built on being popular. He had the car, the hair, the girlfriend. But when Nancy broke up with him, that identity shattered. He wasn't the king anymore. He was just a guy working at an ice cream shop. And psychologically, that's called an identity crisis. Steve didn't know who he was without popularity. But then Dustin gave him something better: purpose. Dustin didn't care that Steve wasn't cool anymore. He looked up to Steve anyway. He called him a badass after he beat up that Russian guard. He made a death pact with him in the elevator. He literally said, "If you die, I die." And for Steve, that unconditional loyalty was everything. Because for the first time, someone valued him not for his status, but for who he actually was. That's why their friendship works. It's reciprocal. Dustin gets the older brother he never had. Steve gets the unconditional respect he never earned. And together, they fill the holes in each other's lives. But Season 4 complicated everything. Because Eddie Munson entered the picture, and suddenly Dustin had a new role model. Eddie, who played Dungeons and Dragons with him. Eddie, who understood his nerd culture better than Steve ever could. And you could see it in Steve's face: jealousy. When Dustin talked about Eddie's guitar solo, Steve looked hurt. Because psychologically, Steve saw Eddie as a threat, not to Dustin's safety, but to their bond. This is called attachment anxiety. Steve feared being replaced. And then Eddie died. And now Season 5 is setting up the biggest test of their friendship yet. Because Dustin is grieving. He's angry. He's not the optimistic glue that holds the party together anymore. And Steve? He doesn't know how to help him. Because Steve's always been the protector, the one who fights the monsters. But grief isn't a demogorgon. You can't beat it with a nail bat. So here's the psychology. Their friendship will survive, but only if Steve learns to be vulnerable. Up until now, Steve has always been the strong one, the babysitter, the hero. But to help Dustin through this, Steve has to admit that he's struggling too. He has to stop being the protector and start being the friend. And that's the most mature thing Stranger Things has ever done with a relationship. Because real friendship isn't about one person always saving the other. It's about showing up even when you don't have the answers. It's about saying, I don't know how to fix this, but I'm here anyway. And that's what makes Steve and Dustin special. They're not just a bromance. They're a masterclass in attachment theory. Dustin taught Steve that he doesn't need to be popular to matter. Steve taught Dustin that he's worthy of respect. And together, they proved that the strongest bonds aren't formed through blood or romance. They're formed through showing up. Again and again. Even when it's messy. Even when it hurts. So, if you're asking who has the best relationship in Stranger Things, it's not Eleven and Mike. It's not Hopper and Joyce. It's Steve and Dustin. Because they didn't just save each other. They saved the entire show.